Hi, Gary.
Good morning, everybody.
Good evening. We're
Well,
opposite.
good evening to you. I've
And
had
good morning
breakfast.
to you. It's so wonderful to see you.
Well, it's good to see you again, Mickey, and to hear your voice. And nice to see all your smiling faces there. I'm eager to hear from you and be with you. You're interested in children, so that makes you really have people who have warm hearts. I know that about you.
Definitely. So let me start officially and introduce you, even though everybody knows who you are, but still. And just to say that I'm very happy and honored to host this meeting and have you here with us. I'm very glad that you get the chance to meet my students. The play therapy program is I think, largest in Israel, our play therapy program. It's a 3-year program. And some of the faces here are first-year students, second-year students, third year, and graduates. The program is 6 years old. And so we have graduates for 3 years, graduates, and students that are currently students. So welcome, Gary.
Thank you.
Dr. Gary Landro is internationally recognized for his writing and work in promoting the development of child-centered play therapy. He's a reading professor.
Mickey, that sounds really formal.
And
they can read that.
They can, yeah.
Be much more interesting for us to just start talking.
Okay, but I do have to say that you were my mentor. So
yes.
My inspiration, this is important. They can read that anywhere.
Right? Mickey was the one of 2 Israeli students that I mentored. And I believe Mickey and Susie were the only Israeli PhD graduates from our program.
Right. Yeah, so let's start. You ready?
Yes, I'd like to hear from you all. How about if we do this? If you'll just ask the questions you're interested in, and as we go along, then I will add the things that I want to say that you remind me of.
Okay.
So who has a question?
I will start with the first question to start us, and then I have a few students that would like to ask you some questions.
Sure.
And I would like to invite everyone to write in the chat if you want to ask something or say something, and I will translate that to Gary at the end. Okay? So you will get a chance to answer, to reply. All right? So I would like to ask you, Gary, to tell us how this journey started. What made you can't see Gary? Wait, I will do gallery view. Can you see now? Okay. How did it all started? What was the journey that made you dedicate your life to develop a treatment for children?
I have an undergraduate degree in social studies, and I taught U.S. history and world history in a high school for 4 years, during which time I completed my master's degree and became a high school counselor. And after 4 years or 2 years as a counselor, 4 years teaching, 2 years as a counselor, I decided I wanted more experience in counseling, and I entered the doctoral program at the University of New Mexico. And I was going to work with adults and adolescents like everybody else. That's all I knew. I had never had any experiences with small children. I have a twin brother, no other siblings. And I really didn't know how to relate to young children. I felt very awkward around little kids. You know, you go visiting and and the children in the family come and start crawling all over you and looking in your pocket and sticking their fingers in your ears. And I felt totally lost and awkward. I had no idea how to respond to a child. And I entered the doctoral program that way to work with adolescents and adults. But in my first year, I had a graduate assistantship working in what was called the Children's Center on campus, but it was misnamed because they worked with parents and they worked with college students and adolescents, and those were my cases, junior high children and up, because of my past experience. And my supervisor, Stan Kaplan, to whom I will forever be indebted, because he saw something in me I wasn't aware of. And about halfway through the first semester of his supervising me, he was the director of the center and he was my supervisor. He invited me into his office to talk, and he suggested that I consider, or asked rather, if I would consider working with children in play therapy. And I was told him I was not interested in working with children because I didn't know anything about children. That ended the meeting. And a couple of weeks later, he came back to the topic. He was a play therapist. He came back to the topic and said that he suggested I consider working with children. So it finally dawned on me, he's my supervisor and my doctoral mentor. And it occurred to me that maybe I should consider what he's saying. So I went to the library, checked out books by Virginia Axline, Clark Moustakis, and I highly recommend both those authors to you. While we're on that topic, how many of you have read Dibs?
Should everyone, I think.
Oh, good. That is a classic in the field. And after we have finished, get your copy of Dibs and go to the end of the book and read the epilogue. If you have not read the epilogue, or if you've read it and it's been many years, go back and read the epilogue to find out about Virginia Axline's experience with Dibs, her sort of summary of how it impacted her. Also, go back and read the first chapter, how she encountered Dibs. I'll come back to that. Let me go ahead and finish my story, my journey. I also checked out Melanie Klein's book and a book by Anna Freud. Quickly dismissed those approaches because I was by now deeply immersed in Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy and had been practicing that as a high school counselor. But I really resonated to what Clark Moustakis wrote and what Virginia Axline wrote. And that made such an impact on me that I went back then and told Stan Kaplan that I really would like to consider working with children in play therapy after he had trained me. So he became my mentor in play therapy, and that was the beginning of my play therapy journey. And that has been one of the most impactful experiences of my entire life, because it changed my relationships with adult clients that I had, and adolescents that I don't know how to describe it. You sometimes in the process of counseling with an adult or an adolescent, you get sort of stuck, and there's not much progress being made in the therapeutic relationship. And I discovered that the more I learned about play therapy, the deeper I went in my experiences with my adolescent and adult clients. And when I examined why that should be true, I discovered that what was happening in my sessions with my adult clients was that I was now responding to cues that I had overlooked before I became interested in working with children, or had experience working with children. If you think about it, with adults and adolescents, we typically respond primarily to the words. That is the things they are saying. With children, we respond primarily to nonverbal cues. Things they're doing with the toys, messages in their play, emotional messages that are not fully expressed. We just sense it in their tone of voice, or we see it in their face, and we respond to those cues. And so I was now responding to those same kinds of cues with adults. A sentence that doesn't get completed, a word that has more emphasis on the word than the other words in a sentence, the tone of voice that changes, how the adolescent sits in the chair, how the adult looks away when they're talking about certain topics. Those are all cues that impact the way I respond to the adolescent and adult client. And I had been missing those cues before. So it changed my life professionally. Also, learning about children changed my life personally. It was after I became a play therapist that we had our first child, and I responded differently than I know that I would have. I compared the way I was rearing and responding to my 3 children with the way my twin brother was responding to his children. And it was such a dramatic difference. You see, we tend to grow up in homes and respond to what we learn in our homes. That's how we learn to be a parent. Sometimes that's not a very helpful way to parent, is it? Our parents didn't know how to parent us. I grew up in a family with a father who was not abusive at all. He just didn't know how to parent. I have no memories of my father saying, "I love you." I have no memories of being hugged by my father. We grew up in rural farm area. He was a farmer. He had never been nurtured. His mother died when he was, he was in second grade, and his father remarried a very cold, rigid mother, and my father simply did not know how to be a warm father or person. I never heard my father say to my mother, "I love you." I never saw him hug her. I had no models. And that was not his fault. He simply did not know how to do it. And we should forgive our parents when they don't know how to do it. Nobody had modeled that for him. His mother was the classic storybook stepmother, rigid and angry. And that impacted my father. When I was in the master's degree counseling program, I took a course in group counseling. And Stan Kaplan was my group professor at that time. And 5 of us from the class got together and went to him and said, if we're going to study about group counseling, we would like to have a group counseling experience. Would you be our group counselor? And he agreed to that. And we spent not just that semester, but the entire year with Stan Kaplan being our group professor. We met at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the sessions were an hour and a half long for a year of counseling. That was a tremendously emotionally learning experience for me. That I began to learn more about my own emotions in that group counseling experience. So that's my background, and I have just naturally been drawn, as I learned about children, I've been drawn to children. Children have become like a magnet to me. I just get lost in the child's world easily. I'm not working at it. I'm just easily. And in my journey with children, I have discovered that the child will take me to where the child needs to be, which may not be where the parents are interested, or what the teacher has described as, quotes, wrong with the child. In fact, I find that parents and teachers seldom know what the cause of the problem is. They just know there's a problem, right? And they want us to change or fix the problem. So I have a rule of thumb about working with children. When you focus on the problem, you lose sight of the child. My objective is not to change this child. My objective is to create the kind of relationship in which this child will feel safe enough to begin to explore through the medium of the toys the deeper issues that they're unconsciously aware of. And in the process, children will take us to where they need to be. And that may not be the place that parents referred them for. But we should follow the child's lead. My objective in working with children in the playroom is to discover that which I don't know, that I don't even know I don't know. I don't know if you caught that. Let me run through that again. My objective is to discover that which I don't know, that I don't even know I don't know. And since I don't know, then I have nothing that I'm looking for. I don't even know what to look for. I am totally dependent on this child taking me in this process we have entered into together, that this child will take me to where this child needs to be. And I do not know where that is. So I'm not this child's teacher. I'm not this child's problem solver. I have no interest in trying to solve this child's problem because I don't even know what the problem is. So my objective is to create a safe relationship in which this child feels free to unconsciously move toward that which they need to work on. And that has become for me a very rewarding experience, to follow the child, not to try to solve the child's problem. Well, that was a long explanation, Mickey.
Okay, so let's move to Malka. She has a question for you about that.
Okay.
Malka, go
Hi.
ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. It's a real honor to hear you and to see you in person.
Well, thank you for saying that, and I'm also having fun being with you all.
It's a benefit of the corona that we all learned how to use Zoom. I wanted to ask you. Okay, it's in continuation with what you were saying about following the child and following his leads, and he'll take you where he needs to. What do you do when, in your experience, when the kid asks you to join in the game? I'm just gonna say I'm new at this. This is my first year, so I haven't had a lot of practice. Could you please explain how and when it is appropriate to play with the child, to join into his game? When a child is playing and asks you to become to be the policeman or to be the doctor or whatever it is, how can we allow the child to lead, track the child's behavior and emotion while playing the role the child has defined? And whenever is it appropriate to direct the child to play with the doll instead of the therapist?
I'm not sure what you meant by that last question. When is it appropriate to do what?
Sometimes it said in your book, or when sometimes you have an option of playing with the kid. Let's say if it's a doctor, I could be the patient, or I could say, why don't you pretend the doll is the patient? How do we follow the child's lead when he asks us to play?
Okay, there's several questions there. When the child says, you be the doctor, I have no idea what kind of doctor I'm supposed to be. So I would say to the child, show me or tell me what you want me to do. I want to keep the child in open to directing me. A good rule of thumb, folks, is in the playroom, nothing should happen unless the child directs it. The child is the director of everything that happens in this. The only time that's perhaps not true is when limits need to be set. And then I become the director in terms of providing the limits. The wall's not for painting on. The paper's for painting on, and I'm giving directions. But it's stated in such a way that the child is still free to make choices. I identify the wall's not for painting on. The paper is for painting on. And if the child continues to try to paint on the wall, then my direction comes out. And we institute the ACT model. Are you familiar with the ACT model? Acknowledge the feeling, communicate the limit, target an acceptable choice or opportunity to express what they want to express. But other than that, the child should be the director. And the child says, you be the doctor. Tell me what kind of doctor you want me to be, or show me what you want me to do. I much prefer that latter. Show me what you want me to do. And then it becomes a reflective approach. The child starts playing his part, and I start tracking what the child is doing, as I would if the child was playing in the sandbox by himself. We track his behavior, showing interest in what the child is doing. Generally, that showing interest in the child is so rewarding to the child that they continue to spontaneously play and forget that they ask us to be the doctor. Because they feel so comfortable and it's so rewarding to them to be noticed fully, and somebody starts responding to their play, that they continue to play in more meaningful kinds of ways. So I don't have much of a problem with children directing, asking me to direct them or to become the director of their play. I start responding to them and they forget that they asked me to be the doctor. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So let's move to Nathan.
Hi. First of all, I also want to say what a pleasure it is meeting you, but also seeing so many play therapists in one place. It's a pleasure to be in a place where I don't have to explain what play therapy is, and explaining being surrounded by people who know what I actually do. Yeah. And that's like, I'm not a drama therapist, oh, so you're a drama therapist. No.
I appreciate your bringing that up, Nathan, because being a play therapist sort of isolates us. Nobody else knows what we're doing.
It's true.
They may have master's degrees or doctoral degrees in psychology or counseling, but they still don't know what play therapy is.
Right. Constantly explaining what I'm doing. In any case, most of my I graduated last year from the program. Most of my clients currently are preschoolers. I work mainly with younger children. However, every once in a while, an older child or a child who I'm just going to read off my page, okay, if that's okay.
Sure.
There are children which connect less with the games in the room, whether it's because they are older or embarrassed to play with.
Can I interrupt you there?
Please.
I don't have games in my playroom.
I was trying to translate it properly. It wasn't. I didn't want to say toys. I didn't want to say games. What would be the proper word that you would use?
Toys.
Toys. Okay. Okay. So connect less with the toys in the room, whether it's because they're older or embarrassed to play with toys. How do you play with a child who has difficulty playing without taking the lead and without guiding them too much?
I'm very comfortable when the child chooses not to play. The objective is not to play. The objective is to be together. And for me to understand what this child is feeling, sensing, what this child is feeling at deeper levels. And if the child chooses not to play, I'm just as comfortable with that as I am when the child chooses to play. I remember a child who, let me preface my story with this. Play does not occur in the midst of high levels of anxiety. So when a child who is 4 years old or 6 years old or 8 years old comes into the playroom and doesn't play, I become very consciously aware of anxiety in the child. And I would say to you all, when the child comes into the playroom and does not play, look for anxiety and be very patient with that the child is choosing not to play because the child does not feel safe. And the child will not play until they feel safe. Nor will the child explore emotionally meaningful experiences until they feel safe enough to do so. So I'm very patient with the child who chooses not to play. Now back to my story. This child came into the playroom. He was, I think he was 6 or 7 years old. He came in, I introduced him to the playroom. This is our playroom. This is a place where you can play with the toys in a lot of the ways you would like to, and I sat down. Do you realize when you sit down, you release leadership? As long as you're standing up, you are the authority. When you sit down, that is a non-verbal message that I'm not the leader anymore. It's up to you what happens in here. And that's a huge, powerful message just to sit down. And this child also sat in a chair and he started talking. I can't remember the topics he touched on, but this was a very bright child, and he seemed comfortable talking, but I knew he was not comfortable talking. Have you ever been around an adult who talks a lot because they're so anxious?
You're looking at one.
And they talk to cover up their anxiety. But the more they talk, the more they reveal their anxiety. If you know what to look for, oh, this person doesn't feel comfortable right now. And children do that too. It is not a conscious choice, but they talk to cover up their anxiety because they think we expect them to do something or talk about something. In fact, I remember one child that walked into the playroom. I introduced him to the playroom and he said, "What do you want me to talk about?" And I said, in here you can choose to talk or not to talk. This is not a place where, like in your classroom, you have to talk about things. And also to show you the release that some children experience. I remember this one child who was 5 years old. We came into the playroom. He preceded me into the playroom. He ran out into the middle of the playroom, fell on his knees, threw his hands up in the air and said, "Oh, Lord, I knew there had to be a place like this somewhere in the world." It was such a relief to him. Be very patient with the child who chooses not to talk. The child I was telling you about told stories, talked about different topics. He talked about astronauts. And this was a long time ago, before the first women had gone into space. This child was already asking questions, wondering. One of the topics he talked about was, I wonder what would happen if there was a lady in space with a man. And I didn't ask questions about sex. So don't go there with the child. He wasn't ready to go there. He was just thinking about like a mom and dad being together in space. He did not talk in the first session. He did not talk in the second. I'm sorry, he did not play. Did not play in the first session or the second session. He would sit there and in between stories, he would look at the toys and point to them and say, "I guess some kids play with that stuff, huh?" And I responded to him, "Sounds like you might be interested in playing with the toys." And he said, "Nope, that's baby stuff." "Oh, you just think that's baby stuff." "Yeah, only babies play with dolls." And then in the third session, he went over and picked the doll up and began to act out a story. But it took 2.5 sessions to get there. Be patient with the child. We have no idea what might be going on in this child's life. Let me show you how this works out. When I say be patient with the process. This child was 5 years old. She was referred because she was biting other children in the kindergarten. She had bitten the teacher, and the teacher was really angry about that, angry at the child for biting her. The parents described their concerns as she wakes up at night frightened and we don't know why, and she's difficult to discipline. And that has been a new occurrence, they said. We've only experienced difficulty in disciplining her in this year. It's 6 or 8 months ago she started being difficult to discipline. In the playroom, in the 5th session, this 5-year-old little girl went over to the, let me say to you that in the child-centered approach, we do not take referral, descriptions of referral and go into the work to the playroom and try to solve those problems. We had 3 problems, right? one problem was this child is biting other children and the kindergarten teacher. Second problem is she's not sleeping through the night. She wakes up frightened. Third problem is that I've forgotten the third problem. What was the third problem? Let's see.
Difficult to discipline.
Difficult to discipline. Each of those problems is pretty easily manageable. The last one would, the learning how to appropriately discipline this child or help her control her own behavior. I would have them watch my, Mickey, you're probably familiar, remember my video, Choices, Cookies, and Kids?
They all heard it and saw it sometimes.
I would have the parents watch that. They learn how to help the child learn self-discipline and self-control. The biting behavior, there are some behavioral things we can do that will manage the biting behavior. In fact, you can almost guarantee that if the teacher and the parents will consistently utilize the behavioral things, reinforcing things that we would have them do, we can almost guarantee that the biting behavior will stop in probably about 2 weeks. The waking up at night frightened, that'll take more time. But there are things you can do to help children to learn to sleep through the night. Richard Farber, F-A-R-B-E-R, has a book out, A Good Night's Sleep. In fact, there are probably 25 or 30 books that have been written on how to help children sleep through the night. In fact, Richard Farber even has a great video showing his work. But we didn't do any of that. In the 5th session, this 5-year-old went over to the Fisher-Price medical kit, picked up the syringe, walked over to the play therapist and said, "Take your shirt off, I want to give you a shot." And I said, "My shirt's not for taking off. You can," and I pointed to the doll area, "you can pretend the doll is me and give the doll a shot." Do you realize, folks, there are things that the child can do to an inanimate object that they could never do to me? I wouldn't mind it if she went ahead and said, "Well, I do want to give you a shot," then I would put my arm out and she can give me a shot. But I'm not going to take my shirt off. That's not a good idea, is it? So I said to her, "You can pretend the doll is me and give the doll a shot." And she walked over to the doll, picked the doll, the adult doll, lady doll up, and let's see, how did that work out? She picked the doll up, and undressed the adult female doll completely, and took the syringe and acted out a very explicit sexual act. And I'm sitting there realizing she's 5 years old. She was not born knowing how to do what I'm witnessing. And this is not accidental play. This is not exploratory play. It's much too graphic. She either saw it done that way or it was done to her that way. Either way, that's sexual abuse. And nobody knew. Nobody knew. And we have to wonder, what would have happened to this 5-year-old little girl if we had set out to solve the problems that we knew about? The causes. Do you understand the causes a little better now? Why she might be waking up at night frightened? Could it be because at night somebody opens her bedroom door and walks into her bedroom and sexually abuses her? Could it be that the biting behavior is directly involved with what happens to her during the abuse? And the waking up at night, she gets awakened by somebody who walks into her room. If we set out to solve the problem, we lose sight of the child always. So my objective is not to solve this child's problem. My objective is to create a relationship in which this child will take me with them to where they need to be. Folks, it is the relationship that is the therapy. It is not the solving of a problem that is the therapy. We can be so wrong. I can't speak for you all, but I'm not like God. I don't know everything. And I don't attempt to know everything. I trust this child and what this child has to share with me. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
It does, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie?
Hi, my name is Carrie and I'm a second year student, and it's a great honor to be able to ask you a question. Thank you for being here. For the last 19 months I've been treating a 4.5-year-old boy, and after about a year of playing, he started playing a play role where he's the baby and I'm the mother. About 5 months ago, he started stuttering in a terrible way. His mother told me about the stuttering, and I actually never heard it in the playroom, so I didn't know he started stuttering. And the amazing thing is that for the last 5 months, every time he comes into the room, he starts the meeting with baby voices. And then I ask him, "Are you the baby?" He says, "Yes." And then I ask him, "Who am I?" And he says, "You're the mummy." And then...
Can I interrupt you just a moment? I find it more helpful if we avoid asking children questions.
Mm.
And instead of asking, "Are you the baby?" you already have enough information to go on to know the answer. He is being a baby.
Yeah.
So statements are more therapeutic than questions. Questions put us in the lead, and questions put children in their minds. Questions always go directly to the mind. Statements go to the inner person. The brain does not have to process a statement.
Mm-hmm.
The brain always processes questions. So the child leaves his emotional part of his person, or what he's experiencing, and the brain takes over to answer the question. So I never ask children questions. Could I encourage all of you in your next play therapy session to decide for yourself that you're going to go through the entire session and not ask the child a single question? That will change the dynamics of your relationship more than you could ever imagine, because questions put you in the lead. And children have learned to answer questions. And where have they learned to answer those questions? In classrooms. So when you start asking questions, it becomes a classroom experience for the child. Their emotions and their mind go to that. They unconsciously now give you all the power. You're the teacher. So avoid asking questions. If I were sitting in the room with you, I would ask at this point, I would ask each one of you to make a commitment to, in your next play therapy session, to not ask a single question. And then next week we would talk about what your session was like. And you would be amazed at the change in the dynamics when you don't ask a question. So I'm so glad you stumbled on to that point with your description there. Now, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's fine. I just want to say that I think that's one of the first things that Michal taught us, is not to ask questions.
They're not allowed to ask any question for a year. For the whole first year, there's no questions.
But we slip into that, don't we? Go ahead. It's been stuttered.
Yeah, and the minute he walks out of it, he talks a bit in like a baby talk, and then he starts playing. And he doesn't stutter for the next 45 minutes. He doesn't stutter at all. The minute he walks out of the room, he starts stuttering in the most very, very bad stuttering. And I wanted to try and understand what happens exactly while he's playing that enables him not to stutter. What happens in the game, in the play?
I think you know the answer to that question. Why do you think he goes through the whole session and doesn't stutter?
Well, I thought maybe he feels secure. Maybe he feels, maybe I don't ask too many questions. So he's free to play.
He's free.
As he wants.
He can direct himself. How is he feeling?
I think he's feeling a lot of, I think he's feeling safe and a lot of freedom that he doesn't feel at home.
He feels comfortable. He feels safe with you. He trusts you. And as he trusts you more, he begins to trust himself. You can't trust yourself until you experience being trusted. So with you, he experiences being trusted. And so he comes to trust himself with you. There's no anxiety with you. What do you think he's experiencing outside the playroom?
When he comes from a very unfunctional home, his mother is a very sick lady. I think he's
very sick, meaning what?
Mentally, very mental. He's 4.5 and he's very healthy, but he eats when he's at home through a peg because his mother has terrible eating disorders and she doesn't feed him. It's a very, very complicated family, very.
Well, my first inclination is to want to train the parent in filial therapy. Would that be possible?
We tried. This moment they're not really, they're in hospital as well, so they're doing a special course in the hospital, so the hospital is trying to help them. I don't give these parents any kind of guide. It's a very, very complex family. So they are getting some kind of guidance, but not from me.
this sounds like a very serious situation.
Very. And I'm only a second-year student.
And that, but you're more than a second-year student. You're much more than a second-year student. Trust yourself. I want to say that to all of you. Trust yourself. You are your worst enemy. You've learned to listen to the child and the child's world. Trust what you're leaning toward doing. Don't question that. Don't question yourself while you're with this child. This child has been traumatized. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, most definitely, yes.
When a child has been traumatized, my first inclination is to decrease the time between sessions. I think this child, if at all possible, I would meet with this child 3 times a week, and for at least 2 weeks. I'd get 6 sessions in 2 weeks, and then I would go to 2 weeks, 2 times a week for a long time, seeing this child. I think that might make a difference in this child's life. This child needs more than 1 session a week. Folks, do you realize how long a week is? How old is this child?
4.5 years old.
Do you realize how long a week is when you're 4 years old? A week to us is not very long. Do you know what makes the difference? Time reference points. If you're 30 years old, you have many more time reference points. Like, if you're 30 years old, how many birthdays have you had?
30.
30. If you're 4 years old, how many birthdays have you had?
4.
Only 4. Do you remember when you were in elementary school how long the summers were when you were not in school? It seemed like school would never start again. It's so far away. And Christmases, how long is it from one Christmas to the next? It'll never get here. And then we get to be adults, and birthdays come around every other week. You have your 29th birthday, and before you know it, you've had your 30th birthday. Now you're old. We have many more time reference points. The child, for a week is like months to us. So with that in mind, even 3 days is when you're in the terrible kind of experience this child. A prison for a month. Not just 3 days, but a month. A week seems like an eternity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Would it be possible for you to try having 2 or 3 sessions a week?
We did try and make it twice a week, but the parents said they're not able to manage bringing him twice a week. Problem. He does go to special ed, and he's not many hours at home, but he does get a lot of support from other places as well.
Yeah. but they don't know probably how to emotionally support him like you do. I would do everything I could, including telling them, I want to see your child twice a week, but you're still only going to pay for once a week. I would get around any resistance they have. They must bring this child to you for help more. It's so interesting when we're dealing with emotional problems. Parents don't understand the impact of emotional problems. If the child had fallen out of a tree and broke his leg, and the doctor said to bring him, and they would take him immediately and put a cast on the leg, and if the doctor said bring him every other day, they would bring him back every other day, because there's something physical you can see that has to be done. But emotional problems, parents don't understand emotional problems. And this sounds like this mother's not capable of understanding emotional problems anyway.
Exactly. And I think the stuttering is a major physical problem.
Could the stuttering be the child's way of saying, I am so confused. I don't understand my world. My world is confusing. My mother is confusing. I don't have a nurturing mother. Why don't I have a nurturing mother? I don't know why I don't have a nurturing mother. I'm 4 years old. I can't figure that out. So it comes out as stuttering. Just like the biting behavior and the not being able to sleep at night and being a discipline problem.
Okay.
I'm almost out of time, but there's some things I want to say to you. Is that okay? I made a note of some things that I wanted to be sure to touch on. And the first one on my list is a child will not change until the child is free not to change. If we try to make the child change, the child is not free to change. The child will only change when we accept the child as they are. I don't have to accept all of the behaviors. I set limits on inappropriate behaviors, but I do want to accept this child as this child is at this moment with me. Knowing that the child is not free to change until the child is free not to change. Does the child feel accepted as he or she is? And the second message, the facts about a child tell you very little about the person of the child. Don't get lost in the facts. They tell us very little about the person of the child. I want to respond to what this child is capable of being, not the way this child is. So I don't need to know the facts about the child. I am going to respond to the way this child is with me. not the way they've been with mom or in school. Do you realize that the behaviors that are described to you are only snapshots of this child? They're just a brief snapshot of the way this child is in the classroom, or the snapshots do not tell you the way this child is capable of being. Let me take the time to tell you a story. Not a story but about a child. This child was 5 years old, and he was driving his parents nuts because of his extreme dependency behavior. He was not seemingly capable of doing anything for himself. He couldn't do the simplest of things for himself. And the parents were so frustrated with him. They brought him for play therapy. I happened to be supervising the play therapist who brought the child, the parents who brought the child. In the first session, my doctoral student walked into the playroom with this little boy and said, Daryl, this is our playroom. This is a place where you can play with the toys in lots of the ways you would like to. And she sat down, and he walked over into the middle of the room, pointed to a sandbox, and said, "Is that a sandbox?" Rule of thumb, folks, don't answer questions that have not been asked. Ask yourself, what is the child telling me? The child really isn't saying, is that a sandbox? The child is saying, that looks like a sandbox to me, right? If the child points to a light in the ceiling and says, is that a spaceship? What is the child telling you? He's telling you it looks like, and so that becomes a response. When you go that direction, the child is telling me that looks like a light, so that becomes my response. Must look like a light to you, Gary. And when Daryl pointed to the sandbox and said, is that a sandbox? Her response back to him was, must look like a sandbox to you, Daryl. He walked over, started to step in the sandbox, realizes he's got shoes on, stepped back down, turned to the play therapist and said, would you take my shoes off so I can play in your sandbox? Folks, he's 5 years old. Do you think he knows how to take his shoes off? Of course he does. He's 5 years old. He does it all the time. No, not at home he doesn't take his own shoes off, because he gets his parents to take his shoes off for him. Rule of thumb, if you do for a child what the child can do for himself or herself, you teach the child you're weak. Do not do for children what they're capable of doing for themselves. He said, would you please take my shoes off so I can play in your sandbox? And she said to him, Daryl, in here, if you want your shoes off, you can take them off. He sat down and took them off. Wasn't a matter he didn't know how to do that. He walked back over to the sandbox and turned to her and said, is it okay if I stand in your sand? In here, that's for you to decide, Daryl. He stepped into the sandbox, stood looking down at the sand for a long time. And then he finally turned to her and said, I think I'd like to sit down in your sandbox. Is it okay if I sit down in your sandbox? And she said, in here, Daryl, that's something you can decide if you want to sit in the sandbox or not. He sat down. And then he looked at her and said, is it okay if I dig holes in your sand? Sounds like you've got something in mind that you want to do, Daryl. In here, that's for you to decide if you want to dig holes or not. He picked up a sand scoop, quickly dropped the sand scoop, turned to her and said, "Is it okay if I use your sand scoop? It's there for you to use if you want to use it, Daryl." You realize she continually puts it back on him to make his own decisions. He picked up the sand scoop, dug some holes in the sand, spotted a little blue car on a shelf right here, just a foot away from the sandbox. He pointed to the blue car, turned to the play therapist, and said, "Would you please hand me that blue car so I can play with it?" Folks, he's this far from the blue car. She's on the other side of the sandbox. She's going to have to get up, walk around, get the car, and hand it to him. He said, "Would you please hand me the blue car so I can play with it?" And she said to him, "Daryl, in here, if you want the blue car, you can get the blue car." He reached out and got it, played in the sand with it, and then he said, "I think I'm through playing in your sandbox. Is it okay if I don't play in your sandbox anymore? Sounds like you've got something else in mind you want to do, Daryl." You realize she's always responding to what he's capable of doing? Sounds like you've got something else in mind. He got out of the sandbox, walked over to the table that had art supplies on it, picked up a red crayon, quickly dropped it, turned to her and said, "Is it okay if I play with your crayons? They're there for you to use if you want to use them, Daryl." He picked up the same red crayon, dropped it again and said, "I think I want to draw a picture of an apple tree." "What color are apple trees?" "Daryl, apple trees can be any color you want them to be in here." Folks, that session was 45 minutes of this whiny little 5-year-old who could not make the simplest of decisions for himself. I'm back the next week because I want to see what happens to dependent Daryl. It was another 45 minutes of dependent behavior, although I counted two times that he made a decision, picked up a toy and played with it without asking the play therapist's permission. Third week, still preponderance of whiny dependent behavior, although I did count 10 times in that third session that he picked up something spontaneously and like drew a picture and didn't ask for permission to do it. Fourth week, I'm back. Still a lot of dependent behavior, but also a lot of just spontaneous play that a child normally would do. Fifth week, I'm sitting there waiting for them to come in. And when Daryl walked into the playroom, I'm looking through the two-way mirror. When he walked into the playroom, he just walked in with assurance. He looked different. He looked around the room and began to collect all the plastic food that a typical playroom has in it. The plastic orange, apple, egg, sandwich, a hamburger bun, all the plastic food. Heaped up all the plastic food in the middle of the table. He stepped that back and he's surveying what he had created there. He had his hands on his hips, looking at his creation. The play therapist is sitting behind him, and she said, "There, Daryl, you did it all by yourself." He turned around and looked at her and said, "Hell yes, lady, I don't need no help." Now, when did he become capable of that kind of self-assured behavior? That is the deeper question. When did Daryl become capable of that kind of self-assured behavior? Was it in the 5th session that he became capable of that kind of behavior? Make a guess. When did he become capable of that kind of behavior?
He was capable.
I'm sorry?
Meaning, he just needed space to show it.
He was always capable of that kind of behavior. He was already capable of being that way before he ever walked into the playroom the first time. So what's the message to us? Respond to the way the child is capable of being, not the way the child has been. That's our job, to see in the child what the child is capable of being, not the way the child has been. It's a new attitude about being with children. To help you to remember this important lesson, let me ask you another question. How many of you know, recognize the name Clark Kent? A few of you recognize Clark Kent, who worked for the Daily Globe newspaper, and the editor saw him as being a stumbling, bumbling reporter and never gave him any important assignments. But when Clark Kent dashed into the telephone booth, he became Superman. Superman. Now the question is, when did Clark Kent become capable of being Superman?
He was always capable.
He was always capable of being Superman. Children are like that also. Respond to what the child is capable of being, not the way this child has been. Well, I've used up more than my hour, Mickey.
You used
So
that time perfectly.
So
Thank you.
we should stop.
Okay. Gary, thank you so much.
Let me see if there's one other thing I might let's see if there's one other thing I think I wanted to be sure. Nope, maybe I've said, I think I've said everything I wanted to say to you all.
Our time is up, so I can't read to you all the comments and questions I have here, but I will email them to you, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, I will email Gary everything you wrote to me during the talk, and bring back his answers to you, okay? Gary, thank you so much. I'm so happy you got to see my students and to be part of it, of my program, and of what I do here, which I think now you all know that I really transfer Gary's legacy pretty well, I think.
Good, good. I know you do, Mickey. Mickey is the Virginia Axline of Israel.
Well, as long as it's be the Mickey of Israel, it's fine with me. I don't need to be more. So.
Thank you. I appreciate your time and your attentiveness, and I've had a good time. I've had fun sharing with you. So
thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Gary. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
יקרים, היה לי פשוט תענוג כאן איתכם, אז...
היה מדהים.
היה מדהים, לא מדהים? פשוט מרתק.
ממש.
היה מרתק.
Bye, everybody.
ביי, גרי.
ביי. ביי. תודה, מיכל. תבורכי ותמשיכי בדרכך, ממש תודה.